So we're live. Good afternoon, everyone. We are here with Ruby Powers, representing Powers Law Group. Today we're going to talk about what happens if I overstay my visa. So Powers Law Group was founded by Ruby L. Powers, and she's a board-certified immigration and nationality attorney. This was like just 13 years ago, so she has a long road in this immigration business. Welcome, Ruby.
Thank you, Liana. So we do these weekly LinkedIn check-ins on different topics, and today we're talking about overstaying a visa, and we're going to be doing this in Spanish on Friday. So if you miss any of them, you can also find these on YouTube as well. So what does it mean by to overstay a U.S. visa? What steps do you take if you did overstay your visa? Some consequences. What could be a good reason for doing it, and being able to extend before the expiration. We're generally talking about the tourist visa in many cases, but we can explain it in other terms as well. So let me just go back into history. And there was a law that was passed, they call it IRA, and it created unlawful presence. And unlawful presence started on day April 1st, 1997. So after that day, there were consequences to overstaying. Before that day, there really weren't consequences, and so that's why when we say overstay, we're really talking about accruing unlawful presence and beyond your status here. And it might be getting a little technical, but I'm just giving a little background of what that means. So generally, when someone comes into the United States on a B2, B1, or even could be like on H-1B and L, other visas where you have all the alphabet soup, right? Online, we have on the CBP website, you can put in your name and passport number, date of birth, country of citizenship, and then it'll tell you electronic I-94. I-94 is the form that basically says, when did you come in and how long do you get to stay here for? Now, anytime after that, if you haven't filed an extension or have some other exception of some sort, you're pretty much overstaying. And so that's what we're talking about. And so ideally, you shouldn't overstay. Sometimes there's some exceptions and some other things you can do. So there's important steps to take. We basically say, if you're getting close to overstaying or you have, talk to an experienced immigration attorney specifically about your case, because there might be something that we can do, and there might be something to try to remedy it. You want to go ahead.
Yeah. So you sometimes see people that go just for like tourism purposes. Is there like any differences when you have any other type of visa? If you have like a work visa and a tourist visa, is there any consequences, like differences between them?
Yeah, there are. That's a really great question, and can get really confusing. That's why it's usually it's good to have a consult, or or if your attorney that helped you prepare the employment investment visa, like talk to them as well about those questions. So basically, when you have a B2, the tourist visa, you're given around 6 months at a time when you enter. So let's say you came today. They would stamp it, and then on your electronic I-94 and on your little passport stamp, they would say you're allowed to stay for 6 months. And that doesn't mean you have to stay the whole time, but it means you're allowed to be here in a non-immigrant visa status. That means don't work illegally, and don't, pretty much just be a tourist and be here, maybe go to a conference and then leave, right? You want to have a return ticket and things like that. Okay. So that's pretty easy to obvious to see that date. One thing I'll mention, sometimes people get the 10-year visa in their passport. That doesn't mean you get to come into the United States and stay for an entire decade. It just means that in the period of that decade, you could come and go for 6 months at a time. But if you do something that makes it not appear as if you have non-immigrant intent, if you stay more than 6 months in a year in the United States, they're going to start thinking you have immigrant intent, and they could revoke that whole visa. So that's a little extra, but it's related to this topic. On an H-1B or an L, they generally have it. The I-94 tells you when you're supposed to leave by. But for the H-1B and L and some of those visas, they allow you to get extensions. And so what you'd have to do is get the extension, and then you can go ahead and get your I-94 extended as well. One confusing visa is the F1, and that's the student visa. And with that one, it'll say DS. And you're like, what does DS mean? Well, most students know that means duration of status. On their I-94, it'll say DS. And what that really means is while they're maintaining their classes, while they're being all on the up and up in their F1 status, the duration of the status, then they are in status. But there's not an exact date. And that's related more to their SEVIS, which we talked about, I think, in a prior webinar, that they're up to date with their school and the SEVIS program of that. While that's up to date, then the duration of status is valid. Okay, so going back to what you need to do, if you're close to overstaying, or you definitely want to go have a consultation. You want to see maybe if you're eligible for a waiver, or you could do an extension, even if it's late. You want to be level-headed and react as quickly as possible. I've seen where some people, they thought that they had to leave by a certain day, but they had it wrong. They put the wrong date in their calendar, or they had wrong in their head, and then ended up looking back one day and looking at their passport or their I-94, and they're like, oh no, I've overstayed. Sometimes there's a way to overcome that depending on the circumstances. So back to what we were talking about, unlawful presence was created April 1st, 1997. So let's say that you were given 6 months to come into the country, but then you started overstaying that. Uh-oh. So what are the consequences? So let's say that you overstay under 6 months, under 6 months of illegal not having status time, and then you decide to leave the country. Well, then you will not have a bar if it's under 6 months of overstay. But if you stayed over 6 months and under 1 year and you leave, you'll have a 3-year bar. And if you overstay more than a year and you leave, you'll have a 10-year bar. Now, there's some exceptions, but basically, these are the consequences of the IRA law back in 1996, which unlawful presence was created in 97, effectively. So this is why a lot of people who overstay, they feel a little bit like they're trapped inside the United States because they don't have another option at the time. So if you are close to overstaying, or you've overstayed a little bit, you might be eligible to do an extension of stay or change of status, but it really can depend. Usually for a non-immigrant visa, you could do an extension for a little bit longer, but if you didn't file it timely, the only other way that you could try to do it would be it's called a nunc pro tunc. And I've been successful with those, but generally it's only if we file as soon as the client figures out that they've overstayed and they have a good reason for that. So overstaying could avoid your visa, prevent you from getting a visa in the future. It also, if you're on here on an ESTA, which is technically not a B1 or B2, it's the visa waiver program, that could give you problems later on if you need to renew your ESTA if you've overstayed, because what they usually ask, have you ever overstayed your visa? And that can bar you from getting the ESTA. And that's basically the last bullet point here, is like that can give you consequences in the future. So what are valid reasons for overstaying? Well, generally, we've just gone through this pandemic, or going through, and this pandemic. There were a lot of people we had to file a lot of extensions for, and sometimes in cases maybe 2 or 3 times. Sometimes a natural disaster where you're located, or where you want to return home to, or potentially bereavement if there was a loss of life and your need to stay for a funeral, or something along those lines, or medical concerns. But the reason why what you would do, for example, if you were here on a tourist visa, is you would file that extension as soon as possible for another 6 months, and you would show evidence of those reasons why you need to stay here. Doctor's notes, death certificate, country conditions. But you also need to explain that you have enough financial means to live in the United States without having to work illegally. And this is where it can be complicated as well when you do these extensions, is that you need to have enough validity on your passport. So if your passport's about to expire, unfortunately, you'll only be able to be given enough validity on your extension if they approve it for as long as your passport is valid. And this was an issue for like some Venezuelans when their passports had expired, but we were able to overcome that because there were some provisions to allow people to get extensions. But this can be very problematic for some other individuals who you are cutting it close to when their passport expired.
Is
Um,
sorry to interrupt. Is it considered overstay if you like go by 1 week after the limit ended?
yeah, that's overstaying.
Okay, and then you get the same like consequences from the other people like overstay 1 month, 3 months, and everything.
No, I mean, not okay. So the issue is if you overstay even one day, and there's ever a question, did you ever overstay? Unfortunately, you have to say yes. So it'd be better to not have to say yes if not overstay. So 1 day versus one month or something like that, you still would have to say yes to that question. Now, let's go back to the other consequences. If you've overstayed, let's say, remember what that under 6 months, and you leave, then there's not a bar for your unlawful presence. If you overstay more than 6 months and under a year, then there's a 3 year bar. If you overstay more than 1 year, there's a 10 year bar. And there's another thing. If you ever want to get your legal permanent residency based off of employment or non-family, non-immediate relative green card possibility, you cannot adjust inside the country if you've had more than 180 days of unlawful presence, and so that can be problematic as well. So you really just want to avoid overstaying in all at all costs, but sometimes you can't, and we saw that happen a lot when people pretty much did get stuck here during COVID. They couldn't leave the country because of a lot of travel restrictions. But for barring that, there's very few really good reasons, and you have to explain it to USCIS or Department of State or whoever's adjudicating the situation. But USCIS is the one that adjudicates the extensions and the changes of status. So if you overstay your tourist visa, let's just say you overstay by a couple months, and you had to renew your tourist visa abroad, then I would probably wait a little while before you try to apply to come back, and distance yourself from that overstay time. But you do need to be truthful about that time. Now, some people are allowed to apply for ESTA. Some countries' citizenships are allowed for that, and they might call that maybe like electronic visa. But those you still need to make sure they can be barred from having overstayed. Um, so, this in summary, try not to overstay. If you do, make a plan fast. Talk to an experienced immigration attorney, and if you have a good reason, you might be able to get an extension or change of status. And if you have a good reason for why you overlooked over the extent overstaying before you filed the extension, then you could possibly get it a non-protonc approved. And I've done that multiple times. But in general, if you see that your visa is about to expire, or employment, student, what have you, you want to make sure you do things in advance. Processing times take a lot longer than you anticipate. There's very little expediting for these types of things, and you want to make sure that you plan in advance. So that's a quick summary about this topic. And I will tell you that unlawful presence is when you don't have a status, you're not under an exception, and that's can be very problematic. And status, with not having a status, that sometimes gets confused with unlawful presence. But generally, if you've overstayed your tourist visa, or you've your status is no longer valid, then you start accruing unlawful presence. And so those are some really important things to consider. But honestly, this was just a little overview. Doesn't take the place of legal advice. If you have a specific question, feel free to reach out and ask more specifically to your case. But when in doubt, just try to not overstay. And if you do or you are about to try to get help as soon as possible so that you can try to mitigate those consequences. So, Ileana, any other questions before we talk about our last webinar for the week, for the month?
I have ones because I
Okay.
have friends that like to go to the United States and then sometimes go to study there. So I had a friend that had a problem with her visa, so she was studying there, and then she forgot to, like, I don't know, renew her visa because she was
Uh-huh.
studying for like 4 years, and then she wanted to do something else, and she
Uh-huh.
forgot about that. So yeah, maybe that will be the question
Wait,
about
she was a student and then she forgot to change her status to something else?
yeah.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, students, they have international student officers at their school, and they help guide them through this process. So they have them, and then sometimes they might get their own private immigration attorney. I used to work at the International Student Office at the University of Texas in Austin 21 years ago. So I'm familiar with that, and that was before CFIS was created. But basically, if you graduate from in the United States from a degree level, like associate's, bachelor's, master's or PhD, you can get optional practical training for a year more if you're in the STEM field, and then that gives you some more time to try to find another option if you before trying to either find work, visa, or extension for go to another level of education. Okay, what do you do in that situation of this the scenario you told me? Well, that's going to be problematic basically. So you have to really look back to when did they graduate or when did they finish going to school, and then we calculate when they technically stop being in status. And then you also have to look, did they work illegally, and because there could be a lot of other factors to consider. In situations like that, they might have less and less options to solve the problem. There might be something in the, humanitarian or family based realm that we could try to solve it, but we'd have to learn more about it to be able to give a better answer. But yeah, this can get messy. This really
Yeah.
can get messy, and when it can be problematic when you try to use just general logic and not having like a consultation to try to solve this can be problematic too.
Yeah, and it's true what you say. Sometimes people just forget the dates that they have to, like, do the all the paperwork again. So it is something that happens, and people has to be aware of that.
That's right. Yeah. So next week we have we're going to talk about affirmative asylum, a, a topic that I truly enjoy and we have a lot of experience over here about. And then let me go back to sharing the good old screen here. And then so we're already at the end of August, so that'll be affirmative asylum. And then September, what we've got a lot of different topics here.
So we have overcoming complex naturalization issues and when to hire an attorney, the roadmap to a successful national interest waiver petition, bond hearings, and we also have legal permanent resident reentry, how to preserve residency.
And that's been a topic too. I feel like a lot of people have been getting sent
Yeah.
abroad. There's a lot of conversations about preserving the residency. So if you
Here
have
you
any,
can,
go
oh,
ahead.
sorry.
Okay.
Here you can find us in all the platforms. So if you want to get like an interview with Ruby, we also have more attorneys. We have Paul, and all the team can help you throughout all the process. So hopefully you reach out.
Yeah, and you can follow us on all the social media. On TikTok, we have little updates and videos, reels on Instagram, and our newsletter comes out every other week in English and Spanish. So thanks so much for watching. If there's a topic that you really want to hear about, just let us know. Reach out, call
Yeah.
us, let us know. We're always looking for topics, and we're organizing October already. But thanks so much for watching, and see you next week.
Thank you so much, Ruby. Bye.
Bye.